It's George here from Madness. Today what we're going to be showing you how to install is our cold air intake system for the supercharged R53 MINI Cooper S models, which were manufactured from 2002 to 2006. So the first part of our installation is going to be assembling the actual cold air intake when you take it out of the box. You're going to want to do that first, and then we're going to move on to the car and remove the factory intake system and install this cold air intake in place. So when you pull this out of the box, what you're going to notice is you have the heat shield, which holds the filter and the rubber trim, two pieces of rubber trim, the intake hose clamp, two screws, the filter itself, and the cowl modification, which is optional if you chose to get that. So we're going to be showing in this installation how to remove that and install that as well, because most people do this. So the first step is to install the filter onto the heat shield. And so what we're going to do is you'll notice that the filter, when it comes out of the box, has a clamp already on it. And so what we're going to do is put that on the inside of the filter housing. And what I like to do is just kind of hold this against your chest or your stomach, align the clamp so it's facing up. That way in the future when you want to pull this filter off and clean it, you can actually remove that clamp without having to take the whole intake system off. And then simply take a screwdriver or a small hex head screwdriver like this and simply tighten down the clamp onto the filter onto the heat shield. And you don't want to over tighten this. You want to tighten it just so it's snug. You don't have to go too crazy with it, but that will keep that filter in place and on the heat shield. If you try to tighten it too much, what will happen is it will actually squeeze the filter off of the heat shield. So a good, reasonable amount of tightness is what you want. Then the next step will be to take the two pieces of rubber trim molding, and this seals the top of the intake against the top of the hood once you close the hood. So we'll take our smallest piece first and put it on the front side of the intake here, and you just simply push it on. These are already cut to length, so you shouldn't have to do any trimming. I'll put the piece on the longer side here. Just make sure it's pushed down all the way. Okay. And that's pretty much it. So now you've assembled the core parts of the intake system itself. So now what we'll do is we'll move to the car, we'll remove the factory airbox, and go ahead and install the Madness cold air intake. Now that we've assembled our cold air intake system, we're going to go ahead and remove the factory airbox system off of this 2006 MINI Cooper S. And we'll go ahead and show you how to do that, and just with some simple tools that are listed in the instruction guide. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and remove this factory clamp that's holding the factory air tube to the factory box. And it's one of these, like I said, it's a factory clamp. We give you a new one, but what I find most useful to get this clamp off is to use a pair of needle nose pliers and just insert it into the little gap there and just sort of twist that clamp back off. And just kind of keep twisting and prying it off, and then it will literally just kind of come off in your hand. And you can just go ahead and discard that. The next step is to just pull that intake hose off of the airbox. That's how we're going to do that. Okay. The next step after that is to simply remove the battery. This is your positive battery connector. If you ever have to jump start the car, you would connect your positive battery cable to this position here. And so we're literally just going to lift that off of its mount. You just lift upwards and then kind of pivot it towards the oil fill cap and just forward. And you can see there's this big arm here that it kind of sits on and then snaps into the side of the box. Now on our heat shield for our intake, there's a spot to put this back, so you'll do that at the end step there. So now that we have the hose off and we have the battery cable disconnected, what we're going to do is take the top of the airbox actually off. And so what we're going to do is grab tools for that. You can either use a Torx bit or an 8mm socket, but you're going to unscrew the front two bolts here. And that'll allow us to lift the top cover off the airbox. And so the motion to get the cover off the airbox is to push backwards, lift and push backwards, and then just kind of lift up and forward and kind of pivot that thing out. And there you go, that's the top of the airbox. So now that we've taken off the top of the airbox, we're going to remove the filter that's down here, the paper filter. Here it is, pretty nasty condition as you can tell. So we're going to go ahead and chuck that as well. And so now if you come over here, you can kind of see what we've got. We've got basically the bottom portion of the airbox, the computer itself right here, the factory cold air intake tube, and the cowl panel back here, which we're going to be replacing. And so now what our goal is going to be is to remove the bottom of the airbox so that we can get to the cowl panel and actually replace that. So that's a pretty easy task. What we're going to do first is we're going to remove this front snorkel tube. And so we're going to grab our needle nose pliers again, and we're going to pry off this clamp, this factory clamp again. Just as so. Discard that. Okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to push the rubber hose off the factory feed here, and just kind of lift this forward and up, as such. Kind of wiggle that out of the way. It's quite an elaborate little piece there, but basically that's how you get that snorkel out. And installation is the reverse of removal there, so you put it back the same way. Kind of has a little snap here where it goes in, and this part here has to fit into that hole right there below the ECU. So those two parts line up. Okay. Set that aside. And so now our next step is going to be to unplug the computer, because the computer is actually part of this bottom factory airbox. They're all one piece. So at the front of the lid, you push in these two tabs, and then lift up and out, and that's the lid for the ECU. Just set that aside. And then you've got the two connectors for the computer. Lift up this rubber molding here, so you can get to the back a little easier. Right here. And so these are two connectors that hold that carry all the wiring to the factory computer, the engine computer. And so we're going to take those off right now. So the easiest way to remove those is to take maybe a screwdriver, and as you can see at the bottom here, there's a slide connector. Sometimes you can grab that slide connector with your two fingers and slide it forward, and as you slide it forward, it pulls off the wiring connector for the ECU. Sometimes you can do that in the back as well, or sometimes you can use the screwdriver like we talked about, put it in a little slot there and just kind of pull it backwards, and that one comes off as well. Just pull that above. Okay, so now we have our factory ECU disconnected, and what we're going to do next is remove the battery cables. There's a little slot that they just kind of sit in down here. You can kind of see over here on the side. I don't know if you can see that or not. Okay, just slide those out. Just kind of push them through the slot. It's pretty simple. And the airbox is fairly free. And then our next and only thing holding this airbox in place anymore is that 10 millimeter bolt. I mentioned previously, we're going to be taking out this 10 millimeter bolt here, and that's what's going to keep or allow us to remove the bottom portion of the factory airbox, which in turn allows us to get to the cowl modification panel. So pull that out. Set it up here for now. And so now we just move this wiring harness out of the way a little bit. And we can lift the bottom of the airbox completely up. Okay? And there you have it. So usually there's some dirt in that airbox, just kind of tap it out really quick. The other thing you'll notice too, and I like to do this right at this point, is you'll notice at the back of the airbox there's these two round ports, if you will. Those hold rubber grommets, and that's what the intake actually sits in. And what happens when you pull the airbox out, those rubber grommets stay in place. And so if you come up here and look, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull these rubber grommets off. There's two of them here. They look like that. And I'm just going to simply squeeze them like this and reinsert them back into the airbox. Okay? Okay, so now the base of our airbox is ready to go back in when we're at that point. Okay, so they should look just like that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to remove the cowl panel. So we're going to take our Torx bit, and start moving the Torx bolts that are there. So you've got one up here, at the very top. Okay, set that aside. The one on the bottom. Down below here. These are the posts that hold the base of the back of the airbox. You just need to break them loose a little bit, and then you can hold them out with your fingers. There's also a little washer that goes with it. You want to make sure you don't misplace that. So there's a washer that goes with this, so make sure you kind of keep those two together. And then last but not least, there's a small plastic Phillips head screw here that you take out. So you just unscrew that. It's plastic, so try not to strip it. And then once you get about halfway out, you should be able to pull that fitting out itself. Okay? That's what that looks like. Now, once you've done that, you should be able to remove that cowl panel just by lifting up. And there you have it. Okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to reinstall the Madness cowl panel. And so you can see the difference between the two parts right here. If you take a look at these two, one simply has a giant hole in it and the other doesn't. So it allows the cold air that comes in through the vent above to go into your intake system, giving you another secondary source of cold air feed. So installation is kind of the reverse of removal. We're simply going to take it, slide it back down in here, okay? It'll fit right into place because it's a factory part. And what you'll notice is over here there's these two tabs that need, if you notice right here, it needs to go behind this metal piece and then in front. So as you slide it in there, make sure that that fits in there perfectly. Just like so. And there's a rubber grommet at the bottom that we have to get the intake into as well, or not rubber grommet, just a rubber panel. And then it should sit pretty flush at the base there. Okay? So now what we're going to do is take our two mounts that we took off with those washers that I mentioned before, these guys. We're going to hand tighten those into place. Just get them hand snug and then go ahead and tighten them down with the wrench again. Yes. You want to over tighten those, just nicely tight is fine. Okay. And then we're going to go ahead and put our plastic Phillips head screw back in here and just kind of squeeze that and get it to fit back into place. And then simply push it in. Now that's in place. And then we're going to go ahead and install our last, or the last little Torx bolt that we took out of the side of the intake here. We're going to install that one down in the bottom here. The top one is going to go in, is going to actually go in through our intake system. So that's we're going to install that one at that point. Okay, so now our cowl panel modification is actually complete. So now what we're going to do is put the base of the factory airbox back in place with the computer. And as I mentioned before, you've got the two rubber grommets here. Those are going to go back on those two little posts. So we're going to slide the intake back into place. Base. Make sure everything's kind of out of the way. Get it kind of generally in position. Okay. And then once we kind of get it generally in position, you should just be able to push down and it'll just snap right into place. So now the intake is kind of back in its position. Now we're going to take the battery cables that we slid out of the slots, we're going to put those back. You see those slots in there, Jay? And you kind of see the slots here. It has to go back into position just like so. Here, let's shoot it from right there. There you go. Just like that. Okay, now what we're going to do is take our 10mm bolt and put that back into the front of the intake. And so we're going to rotate up this, this metal clamp right here. Put that back into position. Oops. Like so. Sometimes that can be a little hard to get in there, but just wrestle with it a little. Sometimes that rubber grommet can move a little bit and it just gets a little out of alignment, so you have to kind of play with it a little. There we go. So that piece is back in position now. Then we'll go ahead and reconnect the computer. So make sure the slider is all the way pulled out. Set it back on top, and then push the slider in. And as you push the slider in, it will actually suck the connector back down onto the ECU. Same with the rear one. Now the rear one has this little rubber rubber kind of plug here, and so you just want to kind of slide that down into the cowl as you slide the connector down. So I'll slide right down in there with that. That gives a nice seal there, just like so. I'm gonna set it on top, slide the connector in. Done. ECU is done. I'll put the two, I'll line up the two rubber boots, and then insert the ECU lid back into place. Okay. Now it's time for the actual intake itself. So that's what we previously assembled before. So now we'll take that intake, we'll set it on top of the factory airbox, like so. And we'll go ahead and we'll put our one Torx bit left from the original cowl mount portion and put that up in the top corner here. And then we'll go ahead and put our two Phillips screws that came with our intake into the two bottom, to the original airbox spots in the front of the intake here. And be careful when you put these in, it's pretty easy to drop them if you, so what I do is try and get it started in the hole first. And, started right away. So there's the first one. This one could be a little tricky just because of its placement. So put them in, but you know, don't tighten them all the way down until you get both in. Slide those two down. There's one, there's two. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to now that the intake is securely mounted on top of the bottom of the factory airbox, what we're going to do is take the battery post over here. We're going to reattach it to the mount that's on the side of our airbox. So just lift up and let it sit in position there. Okay. Our next step at that point is going to be reattaching this factory molding. Go ahead and just put that back where it belongs. It should fit exactly the way it came out. Okay. Now our next step is going to be to reattach the factory snorkel down below. So like we mentioned before, installation is the reverse of the removal. And so we're just going to snake that in and just kind of get it lined up in the hole down there. Fold that up. Okay, now that's back in. Okay, that's in position. And then our last step is going to be to install the factory hose clamp on the factory tube back to the intake. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to trim off this little nub that's here. That's going to interfere with allowing it to sit flush against the airbox. So you can just grab a pair of wire snippers or a razor blade, just snip that off so it's flush right there. Okay. We're going to grab our factory clamp, put it on first, and go ahead and line the tube. So you're going to want to push on the top here where my thumb is. Push on this to make sure that the bottom of the tube is actually pushed against the bottom of the base of the airbox. You have a good tight seal around there. And grab yourself a Phillips head screwdriver and reconnect. Now that we have the clamp on, we're going to go ahead and tighten it down. Use a Phillips head screwdriver, regular screwdriver, or a little hex head. And just go ahead and start tightening that down. Once again, tighten it down so it's snug, but it doesn't have to be over tightened or anything like that. If it gets too crazy tight, it's going to end up squeezing the intake hose off of its mount. So snug is good. And that's really about it. And remember that the filter is pre-oiled out of the box, so you do not need to oil the filter before installation. And we do sell intake cleaning kits if you so choose to buy one from us and clean it at a later date. But that is the install for the Madness cold air intake for the supercharged R53 MINI Cooper S.